Shouldn't majorities decide everything? The problem is democracy and majority rule are not synonyms. Majority rule is a way of choosing. Democracy is a system that ensures government is responsive both to majorities and to individuals. That's why democratic constitutions have two parts. First, the domain, or proper limits on what we can decide collectively. And second, the process by which we will decide. The problem, if we choose majority rule, is that the majority may want to decide everything, not just the issues in the proper domain set out by the Constitution. Let's look at two examples. The French Declaration of the Rights of Man was written in August 1789. Most people would say that the French were creating a democracy, but look at their protection for freedom of religion, speech, and the press. No one is to be disquieted because of his opinions, even religious, provided their manifestation does not disturb the public order established by law. Free communication of ideas and opinions is one of the most precious of the rights of man. Consequently, every citizen may speak, write, and print freely, subject to responsibility for the abuse of such liberty in cases determined by law. Rules like this can't possibly limit majorities. These rights say you can say or do anything that isn't against the law. What kind of a protection is that? The American Bill of Rights was written less than a month later, September 1789. Here's the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's an explicit protection against the majority. Not don't break the law, but don't make the law. Some individual choices are protected from government interference, even in instances where the majority of people would disagree with those choices. But this distinctly American conception of protections against majorities has been eroded in the years since that summer of 1789. Our courts have generally protected political and religious freedoms, but some other individual freedoms, like the economic freedoms that the founders would have held to be just as important, have been systematically gutted. Take a recent example, the 2005 Supreme Court case of Kelo versus New London. Ms. Kelo had an old house in an old section of New London, Connecticut. A private real estate developer offered Ms. Kelo money for her house because he wanted to build on the land. But she said no, she didn't want to sell. The developer could have tried to pay her more to convince her to sell voluntarily. But he had a better idea. He went to the city council and convinced the elected officials that everyone would be better off if the house were torn down and condos were built. Since the majority of citizens preferred the greater tax revenue, the city council voted yes. Ms. Kelo tried to fight the decision and took her case to the Supreme Court. And how did the court rule? Well, the Bill of Rights says, private property shall not be taken for public use without just compensation. This was clearly not a public use. The city was being asked to take Ms. Kelo's private property and give it to another private party, the developer. So that should have answered things pretty clearly, right? Wrong. The Supreme Court found that the city council was justified because the increased taxes would serve a public purpose. So in the spirit of benefiting the majority, the court declined to protect an individual right. But that's wrong. The government has to protect the individual and her property, even if the majority wants something else. That's an essential part of the U.S. Constitution and of our democracy. Without it, we just substituted the tyranny of a king for the tyranny of a larger group. When majorities always win, each of us loses. It's important not to confuse majority rule with a just democratic government.